for the benefit of the people of Kenya. Therefore, I call upon media to ensure factual reporting built on credibility and concrete conceptualization of issues. We should be devoid of biases and interests that often trigger sensational communication. It is time we upscale to fact-based, accountable, and honest reporting. I urge the fraternity to upscale its efforts in the prevention and fight against corruption, as you've said yourselves, not only within government, but also within private sector and all sectors, including your own sector. Because corruption is a national cancer. It permeates very many sectors, and that fight, I think we should all gang up together in solidarity and save our country from the cancer of corrupt practices. And therefore, we need to stand in different places to see the issues properly. And I therefore urge you to embrace a multifaceted lens in reporting so that you are the victim, the perpetrator, you're the arbitrator, and you are the spectator before you make a conclusion. So that you know, as media actors, you frame the public mind properly. I invite the Editors Guild to remain available and to receive support of any kind from government in the things that we do, the regulatory framework, in the things we do, in the policy framework. Because as I've said, like any human endeavor, government as a human enterprise, as a human endeavor is not perfect because it keeps on improving and learning all the time. So I want to encourage you to avail yourselves for consultations, collaboration, and constructive criticisms. And I like what the speakers who spoke here earlier on, the President, the CEO, and of the Media Council, and the President of the Forum. There are so many presidents around. So, of the African Forum, Oga, we hope we can collaborate and see how we learn from each other, improve on what is available, and make sure that we build our country. I like what has been said about one, we don't need to agree. It's not even in the interest of the country that all of us agree. We need alternative voices. We need a plurality of opinion and voices. What we must guard against is disagreeing in a manner that jeopardizes our broad national interest. We should not, for example, disagree violently and use violence on each other. Therefore, Madam President, I know you, it's fine, you don't have to stand. I know it is, I know that clip you showed here was deliberately prepared. And the message is home. The message is home. And I better say no more because other than the current role, you know, I am the immediate security minister of the country. So some of the things you're saying, I'm familiar with them. You are familiar with them. Maybe because we were in different positions and roles, I could have a perspective that you may not have. But I also admit there are perspectives from your side that we could not have as government. So the thin balance, therefore, of how we articulate our differences of opinion and different positions in the transaction of our national life, whether politics, business, professions, we must make sure that in those transactions we don't hurt our national interests, especially the existential, foundational circumstances that assure the long terms the sustainability of our country. Now, you know, the balances between freedom of expression, assembly, picketing, media freedom, access to information, on the one hand, heavy protections, quite elaborate protections in our Bill of Rights. How do we balance that with public safety and make sure that the constitutional order is not overturned by extreme expression of democratic ideas? And those balances are in the Constitution. We don't have to go very far. We'll find them there. And only hold each other to account when either of us is on the fringes of those balances. That is my plea. You know, our friends in the US had a democratic stress test like the one we had in June in this country. I would not call them protests, I would call them a democratic stress test. Because the tensions between the liberties of the citizen, which are immutable and entrenched, and the survival of our constitutional institutions, that delicate balance is something we will have to navigate going forward. I don't want to raise issues which are not for this forum. But I've been wondering, as a citizen of Kenya and as a leader and a member of this administration, we are guaranteed our freedoms in very absolute ways, sure. But I thought the same constitution has also asked us to preserve the nation and preserve the constitutional order and its institutions. I thought so. I thought so. If that be the case, for example, if, for example, through popular consensus, and I'm saying this is hypothetical, it did not happen, but if by popular consensus we generate adequate public consensus to do away with some of the institutions of governance completely, and we can go all the way into doing a referendum to validate it, because that is the absolute way of democratic expression. We decide, the people of Kenya are sovereign, it is true. They exercise their sovereignty either directly or indirectly, directly through the organs that are established in the Constitution, like Parliament, Legislature, Executive, but directly through elections and referenda. If we all decide, for example, through a popular consensus, that we build public consensus, that we don't need some of the institutions that are established under the Constitution. It is popular, it is in the public interest, but I don't know whether it is in the national interest, for example, hypothetically, to abolish the judiciary. Because you can do that in a referendum. You can do that in the referendum. The people have decided we just need two arms of government, for example. We don't need an arm of government that deals with disputes between citizens and among each other, or between citizens and those who are responsible for running government institutions. So it's food for thought, and I know, I believe, and I really hope I'll be invited again, because these are things I would want us to spend a bit of time informally discussing. Informally. It costs nothing to exchange views. A lifelong badge of honor we all carry, you know. So I see no reason why we should not have avenues for talking to each other. I see no reason. I just gave Margaret as an example. She's a professional from your own circles. In the office, all the offices, including the office of the president, the office of the deputy president. Some of you people are there. I'm seeing one seated in front of me who works in my office. Francis is known to many of you here. So I don't see why, for example, even outside the formal avenues, why some things should bother us so much, because the minister, for example, being one of you, is somebody who can reach using your professional channels and maybe bring to her attention some of the things that she could have either forgotten or perhaps not appropriately balanced with other things as she runs that ministry. Therefore, we agree with you fully on the strengthening of KBC as a public broadcaster. We equally agree with you fully and unequivocally on the need for us as a country governed by the rule of law and a constitutional order. We should respect court orders and what the courts have said about the relationship between the Media Council of Kenya and the Communications Authority. There should be no doubt or debate because we are a country run by the rule of law. There could be interpretational issues and so forth, but that is a discussion we can have. But I think there is nothing to negotiate around that space. On the safety of journalists, we agree. For the reasons which I have said in my formal remarks, we agree that the safety of journalists is critical. We believe in the freedom of the media. We endeavor to protect it. Our constitution has guaranteed these freedoms. And you expect it in a society, occasionally there will be infractions. The problem is when we do not address those infractions as we are required. And therefore, I want to commit for the journalist who was hurt here in this city, that is quite unfortunate. And normally when an event like that happens, there are two ways of dealing with it. One is through the internal police, internal affairs police unit, but also more objectively through the IPOA, the Independent Police Oversight Authority. Now we've had a leadership transition in the last 3 months. We have a new IPOA coming on board, I think any time from now. They'll be sworn in. Parliament has approved the names. So, and the other one had, I think, given an exit report. So these things happened at a time when there was a leadership transition. So I will be following up on where we are, and I want to undertake, Madam President and the rest of the colleagues here, that we are going to follow up to ensure justice is done and establish who did this and bring that person to account. Because as I said, the balances are clear. The Constitution allows the use of firearms by persons allowed by law to protect 99% of law-abiding citizens against potentially 1% who want to hurt the rest. The law allows. But the same law does not permit a police officer or an official of the security forces to use their firearms to hurt people outside the Constitution and outside the law. And therefore, I want to undertake that we will follow through, especially now with the new IPOA commission, to make sure that full justice is served. On the question of the board at the Media Council of Kenya, I am told in the next 2-3 weeks, the minister has told me we are finalizing the completion of population of that board so that We don't have governance gaps in the industry. The same applies to the Media Complaints Commission. I have noted and I'll follow up. On the issue of advertising, I totally agree with you that advertising budget should not be constrained because of differences on the kind of publicity government is getting. And even when government is aggrieved by bad reporting, because there are also infractions from your side once in a while, just the same way there could be infractions from those of us who are in the government side. So we will be starting a conversation on how we discuss among government. I know some of it is ongoing, especially on the question of pending bills, which have really made some of the media houses to really have to struggle for services they have rendered. But as you're aware, pending bills are a general challenge in our economy. But on this one, I followed up before I came here, and I can commit that we are doing all we can to clear in its entirety the portfolio of the pending bills in the media industry, to make sure that government doesn't paralyze the operations of media outlets. There is also the issue of advertising and other things, and then restrictive advertising, and also the need for a media center. I have and tax reliefs. We have captured that. So I would propose that both using the formal and informal channels, we can be able to, I've already given you already, in my office, Francis works for Government of Kenya and is with me all the time. So if we wait for the normal government procedures for matters that are urgent to be brought to my office, it may take time. But if you reach out to Francis, there's nothing wrong with that. We have this, inform the Deputy President, we have this issue. It's a faster way. The minister here is one of your own. You can reach out to her, even directly. And I think for me, that's the best way to handle some of these things. And it doesn't compromise anything. We still are who we are, and we respect each other's space. Then, as I end, you have raised two very important things, Madam President and the other speakers. I have spoken to one of them, and that is the need to fight corruption and the need for accountability by government to make sure that public resources are not stolen, they are not diverted, and they don't benefit private people, because that's unlawful and unconstitutional. That's one of them. You did hear the President of the State of the Nation address. He made it very clear that we must heavy lift, the country must heavy lift on the fight against corruption. We cannot sustain this country like this anymore. Something has to give way. The same way we've made difficult economic decisions in the economy, and that's why there has been a bit of unease, because some of these decisions have their side effects, especially at the initial stages. We must also heavy lift on the fight against corruption, using the hard ways, like the ones I said, jailing people and so forth. But also I also mentioned about soft ways. How, for example, using technology, we have reduced the number of characters who are diverting public funds. And if we put that project into 100%, collect traffic fines and everything digitally, we would have saved a lot. And then, of course, we start now asking, how are we spending this money? And that's a conversation we must engage in. But the second and last grave matter that you've raised, and we concur entirely, is the issue of what climate change portends for Kenya. I am glad you took initiative to develop a manual and build capacity for journalists and editors to be able to transact with this very complex and quite frightening phenomena that is changing the DNA of the world. His Excellency the President has provided political and diplomatic leadership on climate change diplomacy globally, leading to the hosting of the African Climate Summit in Nairobi. And thank you very much for the support you gave. The highlight, the profiling of that summit was phenomenal, and we owe it to you, because you are the owners of the instruments of visibility. Climate change and corruption today are national security threats. I have just left the Interior Ministry. The traditional threats of terrorism, organized crime like banditry and so forth, and trafficking in persons will continue to be there in the foreseeable future. But additionally, in our national security priority list, corruption, because of the effect it has on economies and sustainability of the nation, and climate change are part of the national security matrix. And when I mean national security, I mean existential and survival aspects of our country. The DNA of the world, including Kenya, is changing because of very, very, very hostile and brutal effects of climate change. Severe droughts, severe floods, a displacement of populations and communities, resource conflicts, everything in between, even diseases. And therefore, good people, you are leading the way in integrating your profession to the